Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Wellington branch of the Theosophical Society. So the Society was formed in 1875 for a specific purpose, which was to create the nucleus of a new society, a society of divine wisdom, which is where the members in that society don't make distinctions of any kind. So no distinction of culture, gender, or ethnicity. To help us bring about that goal, we encourage the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science, and investigation into the unexplained laws of nature and the powers that are latent in each one of us. So the society has no dogmas or creeds. Everyone is able to think and express themselves as they wish, so long as they enable that same liberty for their fellow members. So membership in the society is being in sympathy with those three objects. So as our president founder said in 1875, we're all students inquiring into the nature of reality to find out what is real and true, as our motto is, there is no religion higher than truth. So before we continue on, we'll just have a moment's silence, and then we'll do an invocation to unity, and then we'll have our presentation this evening. So just have a moment's silence. Okay, so please repeat after me. O hidden life, vibrant in every atom.
O hidden life, vibrant in every atom.
O hidden light, shining in every creature.
O hidden light, shining in every creature.
O hidden love, embracing all in oneness.
O hidden love, embracing all in oneness.
May each who feels himself as one with thee
May each who feels himself as one with thee
know they are also one with every other.
know that they are also one with thee.
Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you very much. So this evening we're continuing our introductory study course into Theosophy, which literally means the divine wisdom, from the Greek Theos, God, and Sophia, wisdom. So we are looking at some of the fundamental teachings called Theosophy, which are at the heart of all the spiritual traditions. And tonight we're continuing on with the topic of reincarnation. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, Pam Stainton, who is our Lodge Secretary. And Pam joined the Theosophical Society in 1976. She's a teacher by profession, and her work has been especially in the area of literacy, which led her to write a children's book on punctuation in 2020 called Mispunctuation to the Rescue. She is married with one adult son and has many interests. She has a BA and a diploma in education and English, and she also has a teacher's diploma in yoga and taught yoga here at the Lodge. Pam has also studied Te Reo and Maori culture at the university, and as I said, she's currently a Lodge Secretary. So her topic tonight is reincarnation. So we will go through Pam's presentation and we'll have some questions at the end. So if you have any comments, thoughts, just note them down and we'll address them at the end. Pam, over to you. Welcome. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Kia ora. Kia ora, everybody. It's lovely to have you. It feels kind of weird. It's the first time I've had the camera, which is a bit daunting. So can I have my first slide, please? Yeah, so there's a cute picture of a baby. So I'm going to read the slide as well as I've got some other notes. I've also got some notes about different people. There's a lot of people mentioned in Vic Hao Chin's chapter on reincarnation and not a lot about them. So I've got a 10-second message later if anyone wants to know more about a particular person. So reincarnation means to be born again in the flesh, from the Latin re, again, and in, which is in, and carn, which is flesh. It is the theory that human beings are born to the physical body not just once, but multiple times. And in Theosophy, it's being born back as a human form, not as an animal. So this is a really ancient belief. It's found in many religions, such as Hindu, Buddhism, early Christianity, amongst many indigenous people, such as people in Africa, Australia, Polynesia, Tahitians, Fijians, and Maori. Now, no one mentioned that when I was studying Maori at university, but a lady I met in the 80s did say that was part of the Maori belief system. Ancient Greeks also taught about reincarnation, including Pythagoras, we all know these famous names, Plato, and Socrates. When it comes to the Jewish religion, Judaism, there's some beliefs, but mainly in the mystical side. And the Orthodox Islam, people do not teach about reincarnation, but the mystical, again, the mystical side of their religions, the Sufis do. So I've got quite a lot of quotes. Some of them are a little bit hard to follow, but see how you go with them. So it's really interesting to see how many religions and peoples actually believe in reincarnation. It's more widespread than you would think. And as we're here in New Zealand, are living in quite a Christian-based society, people talk about it less than other places. So the view in Judaism is ambivalent. They're not kind of quite sure, but there's a historian called Josephus at the time of Christ, and he's talking about the group called the Pharisees. So I'm going to read you a quote. I'm going to be reading quite a lot of quotes. So he says, the Pharisees also believe that souls have an immortal rigor to them, and that under the earth there will be rewards and punishments according as they have lived virtuously or viciously in this life. And the latter are to be detained in an everlasting prison, but the former shall have the power to revive and live again. So this particular quote resembles the modern view, Christian view of people going to hell as well. The Old Testament and the Bible hints at reincarnation. So here's some quotes from the Wisdom of Solomon. I don't know if it's chapter 19 or verse 19, but 19, for I was a witty child and had a good spirit. Verse 20, yea, rather being good, I came into a body undefiled. So the person, because they'd been a good child in a previous life, came back with a healthy body. Apparently later translations of the Bible changed that. I'm not quite sure how they changed it, but they changed it. So in the New Testament, the second part of the Bible, there's also some references to that. And in Judaism and the Kabbalah. So the Kabbalah is the mystical side of Islam. If you've seen Judaism. If you've seen the special tree of life they've got, it's very, very interesting and very complex. So Gershom Scholem, he was a German-born Israeli philosopher who lived last century. He's using the word transmigration, which is used as well as reincarnation, meaning the same thing. Transmigration is taken for granted in the Kabbalah from its first literary expression. So they just assume it's a real thing. So next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. So this is looking a little bit more in depth of different religions, introducing a few terms. And there's the Buddha. I think it's the Buddha in the picture. So there's some interesting, I think they're Sanskrit words. Someone could correct me if they're not. So in Hinduism, we have the cycle of samsara, birth and rebirth. So the cycle of death and rebirth is tied to which the material world is bound. So when you think of everything in the physical universe, it all dies and has a life cycle. So we can think of an insect, a tree, We can think of a planet, we can think of the stars, from the biggest, smallest things, galaxies, they all have their endings and beginnings. So talking about samsara, we continue in this cycle, and there's lovely Buddhist actually pictures of this wheel of life that are really interesting to look at as well, until the aspirant. So what they mean by aspirant is someone who's wanting to get out of this world really and leave it and go beyond, reaches liberation or moksha, a Hindu term meaning liberation from the wheel of birth and rebirth. So the next line is about Buddhism. It's rather complicated. I'm not sure if I entirely understand it. I did a lot of study of Buddhism in the 1980s, listening to a lot of the cassette tapes. And so they do not believe in an enduring self or an Atman. So the Atman is the impersonal divine principle without shape, body or form. It's an absolute spirit. And in theosophical speech, we often talk about Atma Buddhi, often called the intuition or the vehicle for the soul, the vehicle for the spirit. So the Buddhists talk about skandhas, which are attributes or aggregates from an old personality that reincarnates. Although there's some individuality, you do not come back with the same personality. So the attributes can be, when you reincarnate, maybe physical, but also to do with your emotions and your thoughts and mental. So Plato, yes, the ancient Greek Plato wrote, the soul then is being immortal and having been born again many times and having seen all things that exist, whether in this world or in the world below, has knowledge of them all. So if you have knowledge of them all, you'd be a long way in your spiritual evolution. So the other thing, when I was studying Buddhism in the 80s, was one of the concepts that came up again and again and again was clinging and attachments. So to release yourself from coming back to any kind of physical incarnation, you have to let go of all attachments, and that's all attachments to anything, even attachments to a spiritual life. And you also have to be incredibly unselfish. Nothing's about yourself. You're always giving out to other people. So if we look at, where are we? If we look at Judaism, there's another quote from Philo, and excuse me if I don't pronounce his name properly, Judaeus, who wrote, a Jewish philosopher who wrote, the air is full of souls. You can't see them, obviously, most of us. Those who are nearest to the earth, descending to be tied to mortal bodies, to return to other bodies, desiring to live in them. So this feeling of clinging of attachment to other people and emotions and feelings brings us back to the earth. We talked about the Kabbalah already, the mystical side of Judaism, where they study that very complex tree of life. It's quite beautiful too. So next slide. So the next slide is about reincarnation and Christianity. And during the time of Jesus, slide are we up to? It was a common belief. So in early Christianity, it's a common belief. So Jesus was asking people, where am I? I'll leave this, too far. We'll come back to this quote. So reincarnation is a twin doctrine which comes along with it called karma. And I think that's another session, isn't it, Simon?
Next week.
Yes, they're really very closely interconnected. And a little bit later on, I'll read a quote from Jesus about a blind man from the Bible that shows that he did believe in it. But when his disciples were talking to him, they were thinking of, they were talking about reincarnations when they said Jesus asked the disciples who the people thought he was, and they replied, speaking about people that already lived. Some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elias or Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets, which is an indication that it was commonly accepted. And Jesus said to them, verily I say unto you, among them that are born of a woman, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist. And if we will receive it, this is Elijah, which was for to come. So I think what he's saying there is John the Baptist came back as Elijah. And the quote about the blind person, another time Jesus was asked by his disciples about a man who was born blind. Who did sin, this man or his parents? So he's thinking about why the person was born blind. Had the person done something wrong earlier, or was it his parents that caused this to happen? But with Christianity, later, contrary views came up about it, and that's one of the reasons it was discarded later. And one reason was because most people cannot remember their past lives. So I'm just going to read the third bullet point. So the early Christians believed in this idea, but by the 3rd century, the groups had become divided. And the bottom little dot says, Christianity observes, the modern Christianity, it doesn't really fit with their teachings on the resurrection and having a personal saviour God. It just doesn't work. So the doctrine was voted out in 543 AD, I think it was, at the Council of Constantinople. A lot of mouthfuls, isn't it? Convened by the Emperor Justinian. And later, the idea became completely heretical. So if you were somebody that believed in it, like the Cathars, you could be persecuted or murdered. It was a really terrible time. But even so, there were still some prominent Christian writers like Henry Moore who wrote about it. I've written wee notes about all the names in case somebody asks something. So who was Henry Moore? He was an English philosopher in the 1600s at the Cambridge Platonic School. So he wrote, I would sing the pre-existency of human souls and live once o'er, which is over again, by recollection and quick memory, all that is past since we first began. So I'm just going to mention now one of my own personal thoughts about Christianity as it evolved and changed. I think especially the Catholic force in those days, religion in many, many cultures, and it still is in some cultures, was also intertwined with the politics of the time. So if you're only living one life, you have to listen to the priest, and agree with them. It kind of became a force, so this is my own opinion, don't have to agree with me, of a method of controlling people. Because if you've got reincarnation, you can come back and fix things up for yourself. But if you've only got one life, you've got to try and do it in one life. So next slide, please, Simon. Shushma. So there are a lot of eminent people who either had memories or believed in it. So I just need to turn it. Turn my page. So here are some people that spoke about it or wrote about it. Thomas Huxley, Walt Whitman, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Albert Schweitzer, Carl Jung, and Benjamin Franklin all spoke about it. Others remembered Gustave Flaubert, Henry David Thoreau, and General Patton. So I chose just a few, not a lot of quotes, but just a few of their quotes. This Vic Houchin, who wrote this chapter on reincarnation, had many, many quotes, so I didn't want to drown you in them. So Gustave Flaubert wrote Madame Bovary, which I read recently. Now, I'm one of those unfortunate people who read a book and then it disappears. So don't ask me what it was about. But it was a very good book. So he wrote, to to George Sand, who was a writer in France at the time, who used a male name so she could get published. I do not have, as you do, so he's disagreeing with George Sand, that feeling of a life that is but beginning, the stupefaction of an existence that is just commencing. It seems to me, on the contrary, I have always existed. I see myself in the different ages of history quite clearly, engaging in different trades, experiencing various fortunes. Many things would be explained if we only knew our real genealogy. Carl Jung has a particularly good quote here, and Benjamin Franklin, as it says on the slide, is a very funny one about himself. So Carl Jung says, and he followed on from Freud, the psychoanalyst, my life often seemed to me like a story that has no beginning and no end. I had the feeling that I was an historical fragment, an excerpt for which the preceding and succeeding text was missing. In other words, we can't remember what, most of us can't remember what came before or know what's coming next. I could well imagine that I might have lived in former centuries and there encountered questions I was not yet able to answer, that I had been born again because I had not fulfilled the task given to me. So when you read some literature about reincarnation and near-death experiences that people have had and that sort of thing, it's quite often about the tasks, and they'll get sent back because they haven't finished what they need to do. Here's the epitaph of Benjamin Franklin, which is very funny. The body of B. Franklin, printer, brackets, like the cover of an old book, its contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, brackets closed, lies here, food for worms. But the work shall not be lost, for it will, as he believed, appear once more in a new and more elegant edition, revised and correct by Mr. Franklin. I love the way he's so optimistic. He thinks he's going to come back, you know, really new and elegant, and it's great. Now let's see where I am myself. Next slide, please, Simon. Shushman. Thank you. So then we do have some evidence for it. And as time goes on, we have more and more books and videos and podcasts that come out about the subject all the time. So I've included a picture here of children's memories. I haven't read this particular book, Shanti Devi, I Have Lived Before. It was about her memory of being another woman who lived a long way away from where she was living in India. And it was researched and followed up, and everything she said was correct. Others write about their own memories, such as Joan Grant, and she wrote Winged Pharaoh and quite a few other books in the library here. She's very interesting.
There's a lot of them. I was brought up on them.
I bet you were. They're very interesting, aren't they?
There's a couple of them in the library downstairs.
Yes, yes. So I'm going to mention Dr. Ian Stevenson in a moment, but Arthur Gurdon, I don't know how well he's read now, but I read a lot of his books about being a Cathar, and he's got a number of books in the library, and they're also very interesting.
He's interesting because he followed a whole group. Came at first as a psychiatrist.
That's
came
right.
across one lady who had been, I think it might have been framed, and then he checked up and found they were historically accurate. But then as he saw the group, he actually followed the whole group through several different incarnations.
Right. I've forgotten that. Thank you, June. So it's following the group. And what was the other thing you said?
That the lady, he was a psychiatrist.
That's right.
And his writing is very, very dualist, which is actually not my own memory of Catharism at all.
Okay.
So it must be quite a variation of it.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? However, but he's very interesting, and he was a psychiatrist, as you
Yeah,
say.
he went a lot into the kind of belt they wore and stuff.
All sorts of things.
Yeah, actual things that could be traced back.
So moving on, the most famous as well as the most extensive research on reincarnation was by Dr. Ian Stevenson. So I think he's Canadian-born American, seems to be psychiatrists that are interested in this, which is interesting. At the Department of Psychiatry in Virginia. And he died in 2007, so he's been around till really recently. And he invested about 2,000 or 3,000 documented claimed memories and from 10 different countries. And he built up a remarkable body of evidence that strongly demonstrated not only survival after death, but also reincarnation. So one title is of his essay, The Evidence for Survival from Claimed Memories of Former Incarnations. He won a special award from the American Society of Psychical Research. So the strength of his research, as has been mentioned before, is that he was studying children that had remembered things. Another book, he wrote many books, was called 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. And a couple more things as well as he found one idea is the idea of, I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, it starts with an X, xenoglossy. When somebody comes into life and they've got another language, but no one around them speaks it, but they can speak it. And also birthmarks. So one was that's mentioned, somebody came into this life with fingers missing or shorter, and in the past life that related to this, they'd been amputated, which is pretty grim, isn't it? And I think sometimes people come back with, if they've had a violent death, they might have a birthmark on their chest if they've been stabbed there or something like that. So it can be a little bit grim. And the titles of two more books are Xenoglossy and Where Reincarnation and Biology Intersect. So on the next slide, we're going to look at Theosophical teaching. So we've got a lovely picture of Madame Blavatsky. We don't always see her in a hat. She's wearing a hat here. What I wanted to mention here is Theosophists are free to believe or disbelieve this idea. So when you join, this is the thing I like about the group. There's the three objects you have to agree on, but you don't have to agree on this at all. So you can dismiss everything I say if it doesn't fit with you, what you think. And you can change your mind. This is just a story about me. So most Theosophists are vegan or vegetarian. They want to do least harm. And when I first belonged, I thought, oh, being vegetarian is really silly. Really, really, why are they doing that? And then one night I had a dream, and the next day I stopped eating meat, eating far less. And then I just, over the years don't eat it at all. So I completely changed overnight. So that can happen. So Madame Blavatsky was the co-founder, and she says in the Key to Theosophy, and I had to look up the word evanescent because I'd never heard of it. So evanescent means transitory or soon disappearing. And this quote says, while memory is physical and evanescent and depends on the physiological conditions of the brain, we call reminiscence, so she says a different word for memories of reincarnation. Reminiscence, the memory of the soul. And it is this memory which gives the assurance to almost every human being, whether he understands it or not, of his having lived before and having to live again. Now, I especially love Wordsworth's quote, the 19th century poet. He writes, and really talking about when we come into this life, if all of what we're saying is true, we forget. Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. That soul that rises with us, our life's star, health elsewhere had its setting and cometh from afar. Very beautiful. I do love that. So I think I've got a few more quotes here for you. Yes. Drowning you in quotes, but not too many, I hope. So the next quote, which is quite long, so just take in whatever it's saying to you, is from Death and Beyond. I think it's probably a book from the Theosophical Society in America. And it's talking about what Theosophists call the wisdom tradition. The wisdom tradition holds that life and death, being born and dying, are only temporary events in our vast cycle of existence. We go on repeating them on earth until we've learned all this world has to teach us. The next part is very interesting. Then we move on to other forms of activity and rest in an endless pilgrimages through all the worlds of the cosmos. So what they're saying here was we go to other planets. Yay, it's so exciting, isn't it? What we think of as death is only a temporary pause, a minor turning point in an adventure that is grounded in divine reality and therefore has no beginning and no end. So the next one is also very beautiful. Now, the Sufi mystic Rumi has very, very beautiful sayings and poetry, and often I go to a dance class once a fortnight, and often the dance teacher will start the session with a quote from Rumi, which is really lovely. So this one relates to both physical, I think, and spiritual evolution, and it ties in completely with what many Theosophists think. So here it is. I died as mineral and became a plant. I died as plant and rose to animal. I died as animal and I was man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet once more I shall die as man, to soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood, I must pass on. So I think that's really beautiful. It's showing that evolution continues and it's forever changing. You're never kind of stuck at one point. So I've got the last slide, and I didn't time anything, so I don't quite know where we are time-wise. That's okay. Okay, so I've just put one of my favorite flowers, sunflower. So reincarnation put together with karma explains huge discrepancy in people's lives, like the emergence of prodigies, like somebody being born with terrible health or leaving the planet early, or all the unusual things that happen to people. It explains your inner knowings and your own rememberings. So there's words that resonate with this concept, like cycles of existence, your soul or your transcendental self, the soul's evolution, spiritual paths. So when you're talking about a spiritual path, Bill was talking about that very straight one you can choose if you want to. But many of us are on a different path. We're not going quite as fast as that. And we might be on what I like to think of as a spiral. You're going upwards, maybe sometimes going backwards slightly, but you're going up the spiral. Makes more sense to me. That's my own personal viewpoint. But there are, so this topic, reincarnation, is huge, it's vast. It's just like feeding a tidbit. And there are many other ideas about it. So in the last few years, I've come across the idea that we don't only carry our physical DNA in our cells, but we carry our past life memories and even trauma. And also that we carry trauma of our physical ancestors, so our spiritual ancestors, which has been ourselves, our individuality, and our and I've been doing a lot of meditation on that. Just used to have a terrible nausea problem as a younger person. I thought, why did I have that? So I meditated on it, and then I thought, oh my goodness, all my ancestors traveled on ships for weeks and weeks and weeks to get here. They would have been seasick. Does that make any sense or not? Possibly it does, and quite unpleasant. So we carry within us, this is my own view as well, our physical and our spiritual past. So some theosophists have snippets of past life memory, which is one of the reasons they're drawn to the Society for some answers. Or they may arise after joining. You don't have to remember anything, of course. But if you do, now I have had some, whether they're real or not, I'm not sure. But when they do come to you, they're very vivid, they're very strong emotions, and normally something unpleasant, like the way you died, or very occasionally when I meet people, I see them, like someone I work with at the moment, I think, oh, I think he's been a monk. You know, sometimes you might get a thought about somebody else. And when I think it's a real past life memory, it's not your imagination, because it comes completely out of nowhere. You know, when you're using your imagination, you're looking at a cloud and think, oh, that cloud looks like it looks like a little bunny rabbit today. It's not like that. It just suddenly hits you like a brick wall, in fact, or yeah, something really fast. So although most of this presentation is from Vic Howard Chin, I've added a few thoughts, and I want to read a last quote by Violet Pettit Neal, who is an American psychic, and she was studied by another woman, a psychiatrist again, who wrote about her. And in her book Through the Curtain, which is in the library and very interesting, she writes about divine love, and it's quite beautiful. So if you're feeling down at heart and you're finding life very hard, like we all do, because there's so much that we don't control in life, it says that, and this is on the slide, there is conscious and divine love at the heart of the universe. And this love holds your life and development dear and precious. Beyond all words and comprehension, you are a jewel in the hand of God. That's beautiful. So that's it.
Great. Thanks, Pam. Fantastic. Now, Sushi, can you unshare the screen, please?
God, I see now.
I just there's Pam was talking about the evidence on research into reincarnation, and talked about Ian Stevenson. His contemporaries, well, one of his follow-up, I guess one of his, students who carried on his work was Jim Tucker, and he did some really good research, which I found a clip on, of the boy who remembered his life in Hollywood. You know the one?
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Okay, Blake. Yeah, well, we'll have a look. So I'll just share the screen. Hang on.
With the incredible story of what they found.
Hang on, I'll
It's
go
not
back.
unusual for little boys to have vivid imaginations, but Ryan's stories were legendary.
He said, Mom, I have something I need to tell you. I think I used to be somebody else. And he started just telling me these stories about how he had lived in Hollywood. His stories were so detailed. It just wasn't like a child that could have made it up.
Ryan talked about dancing on Broadway, working for an agency, traveling the world, being married 5 times. He even said the street he lived on had the word rock in it.
And it would be, my last room was grander. I want to go back to my swimming pool.
But things got really strange when they picked up a book about the golden age of Hollywood.
She turns to a page and they say, that's me. That's how mine was. That's me. Yeah.
But the man in the picture wasn't even a major star, just an unnamed extra with no lines in an old Mae West film. That's when Ryan's mother turned to this man, Dr. Jim Tucker, a child psychiatrist at the University of Virginia. For 50 years, the prestigious school has collected more than 2,500 cases of children claiming past lives.
And your conclusion after 15 years is what?
These cases demand an explanation that we can't just write them off.
He's written about them in his book, Return to Life.
Had you ever given much thought to this whole idea of reincarnation?
No, ma'am, I grew up in the Baptist church. That's not something that we were taught to believe in.
But with the help of a movie historian, the man Ryan pointed to in the picture was finally identified. His name, Marty Martin. And just like Ryan said, he was a former actor turned Hollywood agent who danced on Broadway, was married 5 times, and even lived on Roxbury Drive in Beverly Hills. In all, Dr. Tucker confirmed that 55 of the things Ryan said were true.
Of course, a lot of people are going to say, come on, this is the parent or somebody else feeding them information.
I mean, it's just inconceivable that the parents, for some reason, had done all that. This information wasn't on the internet.
But there was one fact that detail-obsessed scientists thought Ryan had wrong.
He said he didn't see why God would let you get to be 61 and then make you come back as a baby. That looked like just an incorrect statement.
That's because Martin's death certificate says he was 59 when he died.
Since then, I've got information that the death certificate was actually incorrect, which would have made Martin 61 when he died. But Ryan was right all along.
Are you glad you've had this experience? Yes, I am.
A chance, he says, to live his own wonderful life. Cynthia McFadden, NBC News, Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Well, thank you, Pam. A great presentation. And thanks everyone for participating.